Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We'll start with the breaking cricket news with Chris Silverwood being appointed Sri Lanka head coach on a 2-year deal. This is an opportunity for him to obviously rebuild his reputation following on from that disastrous Ashes series and his exit as England head coach. And of course, the poor form England were on before he decided to resign after the Ashes series at the beginning of the year. Now he's got a 2-year contract. Sri Lanka are currently seventh in the Test rankings, so it'll be interesting to see over the next 12 months, at least his first 12 months, how things play out and how the team obviously progresses under his head coaching. Obviously, Man United have lost 1-0 to relegation threatened Everton. That eases the pressure on Everton at the bottom of the table, following on from their 3-2 defeat to Burnley the other day, which left them in a bit of bother. Obviously, Everton's away form is shocking. They've only won once away all season, but they win at home against Man United. A lot of pressure now on the Man United board to name a permanent successor to Ralph Rangnick. Who it's very likely to be Eric Ten Hag. He's already dropped hints that if he is to be appointed, there is going to be a major clear out in that dressing room. Players like Ronaldo and Maguire could be gone. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out behind the scenes. Obviously, the Grand National is later today, which I will be watching. And I hope for a good race and all horses and jockeys come back safely. That's always in the back of the mind when you're watching national hunt racing. And of course, a video in relation to a video I did earlier today. It's been 30 years since the 1992 NHL players' strike. And in a previous live stream, I was asked the question, could I do some more NHL content? So I decided to do so. I did a little bit of research on it. Really interesting time. And the circumstances behind the strike and what happened in the aftermath of the NHL players' strike 30 years ago. It's basically given us the league we see today with Gary Bettman, obviously, as NHL commissioner, and a salary cap, entry level contracts we didn't have before. A lot of things have changed in the 30 years since the NHL players' strike first came about. So that's really interesting. Obviously, British cycling has entered the fray on transgender athletes' participation and are now are barring transgender athletes from competing at events. And that's divided the sporting world and divided the LGBTQ plus community and all the rest and the above. Basically, female cyclists refuse to compete with a transgender athlete in the field, basically. So that's that. And I think it's actually common sense. I think if with the debate we've seen with various sports, you wouldn't put a female boxer in the ring with a male boxer. Let's just say, imagine Mike Tyson boxing a female boxer. It'll be classed as murder. So I'm just going to put that one out there. There needs to be a degree of common sense. I understand the political side of things and the social aspect side of things with improving rights for everyone and participation for everyone. And I think we have come a very long way in even women's sports participation, and we've discussed that on the channel and the pros and cons over forcing diversity and allow diversity to happen naturally and surveys done and all sorts. But British cycling have it's divided opinion their decision to revoke transgender athletes competing against women and men. There is a debate whether they should have their own separate category to compete. Other sports are grappling with this issue, and it is a sensitive issue, but there needs to be a degree of common sense. And unfortunately, there's a lack of it in society right now. A degree of common sense is not something that's readily available in large amounts in recent times. I was planning to do a video on the impact COVID had on professional sport over the last 2 years, and I didn't know really where to start. So that's something that is in the planning pipeline. Is looking at the last 2 years and the impacts of the pandemic on professional and amateur sport. And what I've noticed is financially, sports have been hit very, very hard, obviously. But we're now looking at rule changes for sports, be it sports governance, with UEFA planning to obviously replace financial fair play in the next couple of years with a new set of financial rules. They've ruled out a salary cap for the moment, but there will be transfer limits, basically, and spending limits in regards to revenue and expenditure. They're trying to bring expenditure below revenue. So they're trying to make clubs profitable, um, which isn't the case right now. Manchester City are under investigation by the FA. This relates back to the UEFA investigation into breaching the financial fair play rules and sponsorship rules. And also, there's been an added extra of they also manipulated youth transfer policy as well. So, while the Court of Arbitration for Sport upheld Man City's appeal against their Champions League ban and the fines they received a lesser punishment. That investigation hasn't gone away, and further evidence has come to light. Now, this is through Der Spiegel, a German publication, which is very good at undercover investigative journalism. I will admit, Der Spiegel is possibly one of the best independent, politically neutral publications out there, in my opinion. So, Man City under investigation. This could be quite serious punishment. We know Chelsea have obviously gone through a similar investigation with transfer embargo placed upon them for breaching transfer policy. But the Man City one, I think, is a little bit more serious, and will have, I think, far deeper implications for the club and the punishment they'll receive. Also, Everton are possibly facing a points deduction in the postseason, in the off-season. Whether they stay up in the Premier League or not, today's victory does help with their Premier League survival. But their off-field issues are also very similar to what's happened at Derby County. They are facing the possibility of a points deduction next season, or possibly at the end of this season. We don't know what's going to happen yet. But that also is ongoing. Everton have been in breach of the profit loss margin rules that UEFA are obviously going to be bringing into. They're basically in breach of financial fair play. So there's Everton and Man City are both in hot water when it comes to investigations, and they could be facing potential points deductions, transfer embargoes, and fines. So that's something interesting. The reporting on Man City has gone largely quiet. I've seen a few articles, but Everton is definitely a hot topic. And obviously their Premier League survival is a must, but that could be in doubt if any punishment is brought in season, although it's looking likely a post-season punishment. And we'll have to see how that all plays out. But yeah, so Leclerc is on pole position for the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. Ferrari and Red Bull at the front. Mercedes again struggling in qualifying. They're not looking very dominant, and the new regulations are not suiting their car. Their car is very difficult to handle. A lot of glitches with it, a lot of technical issues with it. It's not performing as well as it has been in the last decade. So Mercedes are on the back foot when it comes to car development, and Charles Leclerc is on pole for the Australian Grand Prix. That'll be interesting to see how that all plays out down in Melbourne. Now, obviously, for the last couple of years, the race hasn't taken place because of COVID restrictions in Australia. So it's the first time they've been back in Australia for 2 years. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, how the Australian Grand Prix pans out. They've made some changes to the track as well. So obviously, we have to see how those changes also affect the cars, how they behave on the track. And because it's a street circuit, it's generally pretty flat. So there's not a lot of elevation changes, but the way the cars have been behaving recently is an interesting one. Is the weather any better? Yes, it is. I've got my washing actually outside today, which is the first time this year I've put the washing outside. The weather is pleasant. It's a fair breeze, a gentle breeze, sunshine and a bit of patchy cloud, but it's not snowing. So the weather has massively improved in the lot. This time of week, I wouldn't put the washing outside. Let's just say that. I've got to check the weather. Hopefully, it doesn't rain today. It was meant to rain today, but it's not at the moment. But I have to check my washing just in case. The weather's going to be decent today. It's chilly. It's not as warm as it has been, but the weather's going to be nice today and nice tomorrow. Low chance of rain, so my washing can dry outside. So there we go. This time last week, the weather was terrible. Beginning of the week, the weather was terrible. We had some very strong, very strong winds earlier in the week. We had a weather warning for heavy rain and strong winds. The weather's going to be nice the next couple of days, and then next week's going to be pretty miserable again. But at the moment, the weather is a lot better. Thank you very much. So obviously, yes, I did a video on the NHL player strike of 1992. It actually ended 30 years ago tomorrow. So it's been 30 years since the NHL player strike took place. And of course, the aftermath of that, which I looked into in the video, eventually led to the 94-95 lockout shortened season and the appointment of Gary Bettman as commissioner. And obviously, in his time, I can look at Gary Bettman's tenure as NHL commissioner from his appointment till present day, and you can look at the success of expansion in locations such as Vegas and Seattle and other locations as well, like Florida. And you can also look at the fact that the Atlanta Thrashers relocated to Winnipeg. You can look at the fact the Hartford Whalers relocated as well to Carolina. The Quebec Nordiques relocated to Colorado. The original Winnipeg Jets relocated to Arizona, and the issues surrounding those relocations in the mid '90s, following on from the lockout in '94-'95, there were 4 relocations. And there has been a bit more stability with franchises in the last 25 years. There is no doubt on that. Only one team has relocated in the last 15 years. So, yes, you could argue that with Gary Bettman in charge as commissioner, there's been more stability in the league. But you could also say, well, there's been 3 lockouts, including a whole season lost, which is something that is on his record. So this is why Gary Bettman divides opinion. And I was asked in a live stream, I think the last live stream I did, to do more NHL content. So I'll be looking at his time as NHL commissioner. We're looking at all 3 lockouts. Again, I've done videos on the lockouts in the past, but I can use them as part of a video looking at Gary Bettman's time as NHL commissioner and the successes and failures that have occurred in the last 25 years. He's the only commissioner that the NHL's ever had. A lot of NHL fans know no different. There's a lot of people subscribe to this channel who are NHL fans who, as I say, know no different. They've never known anyone else apart from Gary Bettman as NHL commissioner. A lot of fans weren't alive when the player strike took place 30 years ago. I mean, I was 3, about to turn 3 at the time. So, and a lot of the older fans will remember the constant relocations of the 70s and 80s of teams and the instability of the WHA era and all that. Shane Wright. I'm assuming he's a prospect. Let's have a look at Shane Wright. I'm assuming he's a prospect entering the draft this year. I haven't really followed the draft classes. I don't put a lot of North American fans get very invested in draft day and the build up to the draft and prospect pools and let's have a look at Shane Wright. Let's have a look at Mr. Wright. Shane Wright, Canadian. Let's have a look. Let's see how he's rated. He's a Canadian. He plays for the Kingston Frontiacs of the OHL. He's meant to be the top pick. He's predicted to be the top pick. Now, imagine if the Montreal Canadiens get hold of him. Let's have a look. So he's an Ontario boy from Burlington. He's eligible at the moment, obviously, for the draft. Let's have a look. He's been playing in the OHL since 2019, and it's going to be quite a stacked draft class as well. He's the captain of the team. He's played in the under-18s Canada's medal-winning team of the under-18s championships in 2021. He finished second overall in scoring, and he scored 2 goals in the final against the Russians. I understand why North Americans get so worked up about draft classes and draft prospects, but it's a lot of pressure, in my opinion, to put upon an 18, 19, 20-year-old player. I think it's a hell of a lot of pressure to put upon their shoulders, and we've seen first or second year players be labelled as busts, and then different players develop at different rates. It's a different. I understand the logic behind it. I understand why the draft is important. I also understand the frustration fans have when their tanking does take place, and they have altered rules to avoid that being a thing. And it is frustrating watching the Buffalo Sabres, for example, in years past, deliberately tank. The Toronto Maple Leafs deliberately tank to get top draft picks, and it's painful viewing when you know that these are top level players playing. And there are some. I mean, I've seen some teams that are AHL standard, but the Buffalo Sabres, for example, for most of the last 11 years, is half their team would be AHL level players. The mismanagement of that franchise. Now, how the draft lottery is going to work, I know it's the bottom six go into the lottery, and they've changed the lottery odds to avoid tanking. I don't honestly think. I think Arizona have deliberately gone, we're going to rebuild. But they haven't tried to tank. They've actually been very, very good in the last couple of months. They've had a very good recent record. They're more competitive than people realise at the beginning of the season. The Montreal Canadiens have been shocking. I don't think there's a deliberate desire to tank from the Montreal Canadiens either. I think Arizona decided new GM. They're getting a new arena built, temporary arena in using the NCAA arena for the collegiate team. They're in a complete franchise rebuild mode. David's gone, right, okay, it hasn't worked with what we've got. Let's build again. Let's trade up in the draft. Let's redo our roster. Let's be busy in free agency. And I think Arizona will be a better team next year. I have no doubt on that. The Montreal Canadiens, I mean, the Carey Price contract is a lead weight around them. It's basically a good version of Rick DiPietro's contract with the Islanders. That's the best way I can describe it. Mark Bergevin, as previous GM, signed that contract, and it has been a lead weight around the team since that contract was signed. It's aged terribly. Got to have a good cup of tea. That's a British institutional cup of tea. But I think the NHL draft. I will be obviously keeping an eye on it. I hope the Jets. Obviously make some trades to move around in the draft. I obviously hope we do that. I want to see Arizona draft well as well. They're my second team. I have a soft spot for Arizona. I want to see them draft well and build a good roster for next year and be far more competitive. I don't want to see them struggle. A lot of fans from the original six and the Eastern Seaboard say move the team's crap. But they were saying that about Carolina. They're not saying that now. They were saying that about Florida. They're not saying that now. Give the team a bit of success. Those calls to relocate the team will disappear. Blackpool. Look, we've gone from second in the league just before Christmas to eighth. The last 3 months, the form has gone off a cliff, and the Sky TV curse has kicked in. It's been a disappointing 2022 so far, if you're a Blackburn fan. But I honestly believe the team's in a better position now than when Tony Mowbray took over. I think we were overachieving the first half of the season. I'm quite happy with us being a solid championship side around the playoffs. I don't think we're ready for the Premier League. I'm not one of those deluded fans who think the Premier League is going to solve all the problems. It won't. I don't think that the club is ready to return to the Premier League. I'm quite realistic in my expectations for the team. But at least we're not in a relegation battle. The issues in regards to the owners, I've never been a fan of the Venky's ownership at all. We've gone from a profitable club with no debt when they bought the club to riddled with debt. Technically, we are actually in breach of spending rules. So if the EFL was to properly enforce the 135% rule, we would be docked points. We'll be in a Derby County situation. We'll be in a Reading situation. Everton are facing, obviously, in the Premier League with a possible points deduction. We would be in a mess alongside about 60 other clubs. The reason why the EFL, the Premier League, and the FA don't enforce that rule properly because the majority of clubs would have points deductions, fines, and it would make a mockery of the system that's clearly failed. In regards to some of the players we have, look, Beres and Diaz, Bradley Dack coming back from injuries are positive. Gallagher's been, quite good. Kaminsky in goal, I think he could play in the Premier League. I believe that. I think, he's a solid goalkeeper. I'm more concerned about the owners and the ownership of the Venky's. In my opinion, they have been nothing short of disastrous. In my opinion, there's a reason why we ended up in League One. There's a reason why Tony Mowbray, I think, has been allowed to manage. Basically, he's been allowed to coach without too much interference from the idiots who actually own the club. That's my opinion. And it's been the most stable period we've had since the Venky's took over. The fact we're like a top half of the table team, I'm happy with that. We're around the playoff picture. I'm happy with that. I think that's about fair reflection of the squad we have available, the players we have available, the financial limitations of the club with the debt that the club has. I'm under no illusions that if we were to make the Premier League via the playoffs, we wouldn't survive a season. We would be done within we will do a Barnsley or a Bradford City a season, maybe 2 seasons, and then it will be a catastrophic disaster afterwards. We need new ownership, basically. We need ownership that can, completely rebuild trust between the ownership and the fans, and build a more stable club. I'm not I'm not angry that we're a championship club. Of course, I want us to be in the Premier League. I'm just more realistic with the expectations, considering the owners that we have. Um, where we were before they bought the club was in a very stable financial state. We were an upper mid-table side on the edge of Europe constantly. We made Europe quite a few times. Then they take over and it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And it's been painful viewing for the better part of a decade. It really has. It's been absolutely painful viewing at times. Um, when we ended up in League One, I thought, Christ, we could go tumble down to we could do a Portsmouth, we could do a Bradford City and an Oldham, a Swindon, ex Premier League clubs who've ended up in League Two. I honestly thought that was a realistic possibility. But as it is, we're not, and we still have a chance of making playoffs. So I would rather us, yeah. If we were to make the playoff final, I would cut my leg off. I would sell organs for a ticket to get to Wembley. I know I live in the south of England, so that's possibly easier for me logistically wise to do that. Um, and I would love to see the club back in the Premier League, but with the current ownership, I fear for the future of the club with them in charge. Quite frankly. However, in the last few seasons with Tony Mowbray in charge, there's stability. That's something the club's been lacking since the Venkies took over. If I was to like a team based on your ancestor from, would Blackpool be correct? No, Blackpool is a local rival. My dad's family is a mix from the West Country and Liverpool. So my dad's family is a bit of a mix. My mum's family is even more of a mix. I've got some Scandinavian in me and some Essex blood, and both my dad's side, my mum's side, have got a lot of Midlands. So if you were to look at where my heritage is from, you could choose any club from the northwest. I wouldn't be angry. Any club from the West Midlands, I wouldn't be angry. Any club from the West Country, I wouldn't be overly angry. And I think I have a soft spot for Brentford. My mum's parents are both from that part of West London, so that's interesting. My Norwegian ancestry and Scandinavian and Swedish ancestry, I wouldn't be angry if someone chose, Trondheim or Mulder, for example. I would be like, that'd be a good choice. The Essex side of my family would be either Southend United would probably be an Essex club that I would suggest people look for. I've got a bit of Essex in me and a bit of East London, so West Ham, Leighton Orient, that kind of thing. But if you were to do my genealogy, it's a mess. My uncle supports the Oval Town. They're currently in the National League. They were once in the Championship, League One and League Two. They have been a Football League side. The local club to my dad's family in the West Country is Dorchester Town, which my dad used to play for in the non-league. But I have a soft spot for Brentford, and I've got a soft spot for Bournemouth. Of course, Bournemouth is in a playoff race as well, and a promotion race with us, so that's a bit frustrating. But as long as it isn't bloody Burnley, that's all I can say. But we've done some family history, and the interesting thing is that we had a distant relation played for Wolves in the 50s. So that's quite interesting. And the area of the West Midlands I'm from is like Walsall, and they've got a solid Football League side, and Castle Bromwich, ironically, West Brom, and I've got a soft spot for West Brom. But if you were to look at my genealogy, I mean, Rosenborg in Norway would be another team that would possibly have a strong link. Um, so yes, it gets interesting. On the Swedish side of things, it gets really interesting, and I've got a bit of French in me as well. So we could even look at Bordeaux would be, I think, the big French club near where my French ancestors are from, in Gascony. Bordeaux, bonjour, the home of claret wine. Um, and on the Swedish side of things, Helsingborgs would possibly be, um, or Malmo. But it is what it is. But me dad's family is interesting they have the support for Southampton and the Oval Town and Liverpool get into the equation. Uh, my mum's family, it's a real interesting eclectic mix of football clubs. Very eclectic mix. Burnley gets in there. Oh, darn. And yes, we did find out a distant relation played for Walsall and Wolverhampton in the 50s. So there is that kind of mix. The War of the Bucket, yes. Modena and Bologna are going to war over Townwell Bucket. Um, but there was other reasons for it. It just was an excuse to kick the shit out of each other for 6 weeks, quite literally. And it's like the War of Jenkins' Ear, one of the most pointless conflicts. Um, when's the next time you see myself? I see myself. Well, if all goes well and I can get tickets to the Rugby League World Cup, I'm hoping if I can get tickets to one of the games at the Emirates in North London. That's my hope. Whether that actually happens or not is another thing. But I hope to, yeah, be able to get tickets for the Rugby League World Cup at the end of this year. I mean, it was meant to take place last year, but I was actually kind of glad it got postponed by 12 months because obviously last summer I had a motorcycle accident and there was a few other health related issues, both mental and physical, that basically knocked me off my feet for the best part of 3 months. So I couldn't afford to go. But I was actually kind of glad that in the end, the organisers decided to postpone the tournament. And we can argue that the pros and cons of Australia and New Zealand and the Australian Rugby League Commission basically pulling out their players. But that's my hope is in October, November, I get to go see the Rugby League World Cup, at least a game, if I can. But it might not happen. Obviously, I've got Ascot Racecourse up the road. I might go see some horse racing at some point. There's 20 odd race meets a year, so I have an opportunity at least twice a month or so to have a look in at some horse racing up at Ascot Racecourse. Maybe if I can get into Southwest London, watch the King George Chase at Kempton. That's a possibility, which is another horse race track we have on the edge of Southwest London, which has an indirect train line. You actually get out train station. There's the racecourse. So I might, if the weather, I might do. Again, it depends on booking some time off work and the availability of tickets really. And so, but that's something for the next 8 months, possibly to go to. But in reality, I don't mind not going to major sporting events if that makes any kind of sense. The cost of them now, and ticket waiting lists and transport costs are extortionate. So while I've been to a lot of sporting events and I've been very privileged to have been to some of the best stadiums in the UK and privileged to have seen international sport and domestic competitions. Um, at the moment, with if the channel was full time, then yeah, I'd happily have a day out and then film things for the channel. But I've got a full time job and I've got to factor that in as well. And so I've got to do the work life balance, which is just part of life. There's a few things I would like to do. I mean, I would like to go see some more ice hockey again, or hockey as you would call it, Dan, and try and take in some more hockey. But again, I would have to work that around booking some time off work and logistics, getting to and from games. And that's something that is sort of in the pipeline planning wise, but it depends on a lot of factors. Um, the availability of friends as well going. Get a group ticket actually works out cheaper than getting individual tickets. So there is that, and you've got to pre-book and bits and pieces. So there's a few things I have to factor in that regard. Would I ever do a vlog? I filmed some sporting events when I've been at them and taken photos and which are on my Facebook and all that, which is just for my personal friends and myself. I've put some of the videos I've put up of some ice hockey on the channel, obviously. Uh, that was actually a long time ago. That was nearly 4.5 years ago. So it's difficult because you've got to use the arena Wi-Fi and things like that, or your data, and can be a bit difficult if you're a bit of a data black spot, which is a bit of a pain. But yeah, if I had the opportunity, I would like to interview some some athletes. You know, sit down and like grill them, and ask questions and things like that. I've had the opportunity. I was offered an opportunity to work with a rugby league publication, and I actually turned it down. I do believe for the right reasons. Um, because I've got a full time job and I have to juggle a full time job with doing this, and I live by myself, so I've got to obviously juggle bills and finances and my finances. It's very very difficult to travel and do stuff like that. But would I like to vlog things? Absolutely. Something that if the channel was a full time thing and was making enough money, then I can justify the travel cost and the related costs of setting up for an interview or setting up to go to a sporting event. But the channel isn't my full time occupation, and the salary or my take home pay isn't glamorous. Let's just say that. I earn a decent wage, enough for me to get by and pay my bills and keep a roof over my head. But there's a lot of people right now who can't even afford to do that. So salary wise, I earn enough to be comfortable at the moment. But I don't have enough saved away to justify spending 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 quid on an experience to get tickets, transport, and hotel accommodation to do things like that. So there is an unfortunate side effect of living in a by yourself in a private rent with bills and taxes and what you call rates and things like that, and expenditure of feeding oneself. It's expensive, and when it comes to ticket price, that's something that a lot of professional sports have been criticised of getting wrong. Look at the Six Nations with Wales, their last two home games, a lot of unsold tickets. And the Welsh Rugby Union were heavily criticised for their ticketing policy against France and Italy and the prices they were charging. And while the TV companies had a big say on having that Friday night game against the French, 10,000 empty seats for a must-win game. So ticket price comes up a lot when it comes to the debate with professional sports in regards to pricing of tickets, prices of the associated like food and drink and concession stands, merchandise. They regularly come up in the topic of conversation. And looking at the Grand National today, the Grand National meet some of the prices that. Bear in mind, Liverpool is not as regional variations is generally a cheaper city to live in for prices for rentals and property prices and prices in the shops. Drunk at a football game, it's kind of you're not really it's difficult. You're not really allowed to have alcohol in the stadiums, but a lot of fans will drink before going to the match and then drink after the match. Same in Europe. There's a lot of the fans will meet up in pubs and bars before the game, drink heavily, go to the game, and then drink heavily after the game, and then the authorities wonder why there's mass disorder. And it's not just an English problem. It's a European issue with not just football but rugby as well. Although rugby fans tend to be better behaved. But there are bans in place of stadiums selling alcohol at certain sports events. So football, alcohol is actually banned in the stadiums, whereas rugby, it's not, and cricket, it's not. Um, but it is an issue, especially if it's a major clash between two big rivals. It's been a problem for a very very long time. There are calls for local authorities to ban alcohol sales on match days, um, and that's a debate that's been had for a very very long time, a very long time. But you will find that older football stadiums in the UK are very near pubs. And QPR, all four corners of the ground, there's a pub on the corner. So where the ground is in West London, QPR, Queen's Park Rangers, a friend of mine used to run one of the pubs, and there's a pub on each corner of the ground. Not in the ground, but opposite the ground. Each corner, there's four pubs. And match days are generally their best days for revenue, which is no surprise. The police will try to segregate the away fans at a segregated location, so a pub or a bar, and keep the away fans in one location. Of course, things they can drink. But pub and bar owners will say it's their match days is when they make their most income. Um, More modern stadiums are generally further away from town and city centres, so there's less accessibility for pubs, but fans will still find a way to meet up and drink before the game, be it on public transport or at pubs and bars, and then make their way to the stadium. So it's an issue that the FA and local police and local authorities have been dealing with ad nauseum for 40, 50 years, quite frankly. Basically, the modern era. It's been an issue that's been regularly discussed in England, Wales, and Scotland for a very, very long time. Banning the sale of alcohol on match days. It's you've got to weigh up the economics for the pub and restaurant bar owners, who obviously that's their biggest takings of the week or the month or the year in some cases, and weighing up the disorder that goes with said events. So the old UEFA Cup, which is now the Europa League, Rangers were playing Zenit St. Petersburg in 2008, and there was a big. It was in Manchester, and there was a big. Obviously, Rangers being a UK side, a lot of fans has got on the train from Glasgow. More fans than actually had tickets, and they put up a fan zone in the city centre, which ended up becoming a riot. When the big screen failed, there was a 15,000 Rangers fans, predominantly, who were predominantly very, very drunk, very aggressive, and they basically had a riot. So, it was really, it was not great image for the club. It wasn't great image for Manchester City Centre, or greater Manchester Police for how they handled such a large crowd, a larger than expected crowd, in the city centre. I mean, half of Glasgow basically emptied and went down to Manchester for the day. There was a lot of disorder, a lot of arrests. There was basically a riot that lasted about 8 hours. Are you heavily judged? You can be thrown out. I have seen it done. However, that can actually exacerbate the situation. It can actually make things worse if you've already got a hostile home or away crowd that are already very, very hostile to stewarding and the police. It can make the situation worse. I've seen it done, but yeah, there are calls to ban the sale of alcohol on match days. That doesn't mean fans won't smuggle it in, and doesn't mean fans won't drink before the game by buying their own what you call a convenience store, or we call an off license, when alcohol sales are allowed under their operating license. And I've seen it many times: rugby, football, and cricket on public transport when I'm just going about my daily business, and fans been quite drunk. I remember one time I was visit my ex partner years ago. Lived in the edge of southwest London, and to get to her place, I had to go into London to Twickenham and get another train from Twickenham to where she lived, which is actually ironically near Kempton Park Racecourse. So do your geography. Uh, Southwest London, and I chose the time I chose to get the train was at exactly the same time England were playing Wales at Twickenham in a pre World Cup warm up match before the 2011 Rugby Union World Cup. And it was the first time I got the train to where she lived. And I asked the platform attendant what platform, because I had to change trains. And Twickenham, there's multiple platforms. So I had to change trains. And I said, what platform do I get to get where I've got to go? And she said, this platform, well, you want to hurry up because you're about to have 80,000 drunk rugby fans. And as she said that, the first fans appeared from the stadium, which is only a 10-minute walk from the station. And they were piling onto the platforms to get their connecting trains to Wales or the rest of England. And they were quite hammered. They were in a good mood, but they were very, very drunk. And so I very quickly just went, and I had to battle with thousands of quite inebriated rugby fans to get where I was going in southwest London. And so public transport takes a massive hit on big sporting events. And as we saw at the at the Euros final, the disorder that took place inside and outside Wembley, a lot of alcohol was involved, and it made national and international headlines. It overshadowed a very good tournament. We weren't the only nation to have some negative headlines coming out of that tournament. The Hungarians copped a lot of negative press as well. There was some bad scenes in Budapest, some unsavoury scenes over there, but security was hammered quite literally in the post-match report. The security company that was hired to do the event took a lot of criticism. The stewarding was poor, the policing was shocking, and yeah, it wasn't a very good advert for us trying to get the 2028 Euros, which ironically we're favourites to get, but we'll see what happens. Turkey are also bidding for the 2028 Euros, and ironically, Russia are trying to bid for it as well. But that was a really bad advert for the sport. A really bad advert. Rugby union fans tend to be better behaved. Cricket fans are generally pretty jovial as well and better behaved, although we have seen a few incidents in cricket where fans have lobbed missiles at players. At test matches and at one-day internationals and domestic cricket. Australia is renowned for that. But generally speaking, it's football seems to be the sport which has the most problems in Europe and the Commonwealth nations where it's played. I don't know about the US. I've seen obviously a fair bit of footage from professional sports leagues in the US. American sports fans and alcohol do not mix. Um, but the sporting culture is different. Unless you're from Philadelphia, where you generally get pelted with missiles by the home fans, even if you're the away team. It's 5 days, 5-day test matches. It used to be 6 days for a test match, but now it's 5 days. They are time limited. They don't go on forever. Test matches last 5 days, and by the end of the evening session, if there's no overall winner, it ends up in a draw. Or if you fail to meet the run total, generally 5 days is the length of the test match. Sometimes it's finished within the time frame. So they're time limited. T20 is 20 overs per side. One-day internationals are 50 overs per side. First class cricket is 4 days. And Test cricket is 5 days maximum, although the match can be finished earlier. I think the earliest a Test match is finished is like a day and a half, 2 days. Done, because the one team is just generally that bad. So cricket has got a time limit. I think I think the longest hockey match went to like 5 overtimes in the playoffs. There's a record for. Well, they have stops. They don't stay awake the entire time. You have sessions, so you have 3 sessions on day 1, 3 sessions on day 2, 3 sessions on day 3, 3 sessions on day 4, and 3 sessions on day 5. You'll start play at about 10 to 11 o'clock in the morning. You'll have the morning session until lunch, which is generally about 3 hours. You have a half-hour break, then you have the afternoon session for another 3 hours, and then you have another half-hour break, and then you have the evening session for about 3 hours, and then that's end of play for the day, and then the teams go back to their respective hotels, and they do the same thing again the next day. 3 sessions, again, go back to the team hotel, third day, 3 sessions, go back to the team hotel, and if you get to the fourth or fifth day, the same principle. You can go up to 5 days, but you do sleep. It's not constant play. It's broken up into sessions of play. T20, the first team will bat first for 20 overs maximum. They can be obviously all out before the 20 overs is up. And then the bowling team will swap over. They'll bat for however many overs it takes to reach that run total. If they run out of wickets, they lose. Same with one days, it's 50 overs. You can generally is base a 1 day international is the equivalent of a day's test for length of play. It's generally so a 1 day international was the equivalent of a day's a 1 day with all 3 sessions of a test match. That's basically how a 1 day international works. It's the equivalent of a day out of a 5-day test match for play. You get 100 overs in a day, which is generally about how much you would get on a good run. If you get a good and obviously each session is limited to the amount of overs as well. So there'll be a set amount of overs per session. A test match is it can be as much as they can schedule about 135 overs. I think is the maximum can be scheduled. It depends on daylight. If you've got a day-night test and you've got a good run rate or a good over rate where they're bowling quite quickly or they're batting quite quickly, they can actually schedule more overs in there. But there's actually test rules. I think they're limited to how many overs each side are allowed per innings, because you have 2 innings. You'll back your first innings, and then the opposition will back their first innings. If they fail to reach a run total, the team that's ahead can enforce a rule called the follow-on, which the team that follows on, batting 2 innings back to back, generally loses the test match. A draw is the best result you can possibly get out of that, realistically, although it has been proven you can win when you've batted the follow-on. It's ridiculous. And then you would have 2 innings each. Generally, there's a toss at the beginning of day one. A team will win the toss and choose to bat, or they will win the toss and choose to bowl and put the opposition into bat. Depends on weather conditions, wicket conditions, fielding conditions. If it's overcast, if it's a day like today where it's changeable, sunshine and overcast conditions, you might go, okay, it's a bowling wicket. We'll choose to bowl first. Now, if that batting side gets like 600 runs, oh yeah, they had a very good couple of days. I've seen some test sides back for 2.5 days. The opposition come in, they have to meet a minimum number of runs to avoid the follow-on. And some sides will refuse to actually employ the follow-on. They'll say, we'll bat again. And the opposition at that point will generally be hoping for a draw as a best result, unless they have a explosive second innings and they're just starting to knock things around quite well. So draws in test matches are quite common. When the follow-on is enforced, the second batting side has failed to reach a minimum number of runs to avoid it. Now, it's up to the opposition captain to go, we'll put them in for a second innings in a row. And I've seen it done, where the first side that's batted has put up a good solid total. It's their turn to bowl. They've bowled out the opposition for a very low score. They've gone, we'll put them in because we want to win quickly. We think we can win quickly. So you make them bat again. And I've seen it once where the follow-on's been enforced and the opposition have failed to even meet the first innings total of the opposition with their both innings combined. I think it was England-Zimbabwe in 2003. Their 2 combined totals failed to meet England's first innings totals. They lost by an innings and 10 wickets. Something ridiculous, like they lost by an innings and so many runs. It was ridiculous. But yeah, there are time limits. The ICC are looking at day-night tests where you start in the early evening when it's daylight and you play under floodlights. I think that's the way to go forward. I think it will maximise TV revenue and exposure, and it'll be better for fans. Because some test matches which start midweek really empty for the first session of play. Not a lot of fans in attendance, so it's better for crowd numbers, I think, and it's a good way to go forward. Do I think the Premiership Rugby is the best league in rugby for clubs? I would go the French league is possibly the best. Definitely for players, and the clubs are better financed in the top 2 divisions in French rugby. There's more financial certainty in French rugby. I think English rugby's got a lot of problems. I like the United Rugby Championship to a certain extent, but the Welsh clubs are in massive financial difficulty, and that poses a threat to the competition going forward with the financial issues that Welsh rugby is facing. And there's calls for the Welsh clubs to withdraw, and that would have to lead to a restructuring of the league between the Scottish, Irish, Italian, and South African teams in the United Rugby Championship. So the issues financially with Welsh Rugby Union are posing issues for the United Rugby Championship, which has been rebranded from the Pro League for this season. And the South Africans joining the South Africans have obviously had their own issues with the Super Rugby format collapsing and some of the issues there. I would say the French top two divisions is the best for clubs. I would argue the English system has got flaws, and we know there's massive problems with the English system, and they're trying to ring fence it permanently, which I don't think is the way to go. But the French rugby is better run. The top two divisions in France are better off financially. Attendances are far better. Actual playing product, you could debate if the French league is the best league, because teams' away form is generally heavily criticised. Very few teams have a good away record, but attendances are a lot better. The finances are more stable. The players get paid more, and you get international players from all over the world playing there. There's been no salary cap breaches that I can think of in French rugby because all the clubs are pretty wealthy. There's no need. Even if you're in the second tier, it's well supported. It's got a good TV deal in France. It's got a solid fan base in France. They're obviously trying to grow the game outside the southwest more. And you've got a couple of clubs in Paris, but they're trying to grow the game in the north and the east of France. But yeah, the situation in rugby union in England is such that two salary cap breaches and then an odd numbered league with the amount of teams and then ring fencing, and the way they've dealt with the Saracens and Leicester salary cap breaches is a mess. It's a difficult one because you'd have to look at the national sides are doing. The French national side has had a resurgence in the last couple of years under Fabien Galtier, and even before Fabien Galtier, they were already unearthing really good talent. And there's a reason why they're, I think, in my opinion, one of the best teams in the world, and Ireland as well. For a limited player pool in Ireland, they really are doing something. The Premiership is still good, but it's a flawed league. And the divisions below, the money isn't there because of our obsession with football and the media rights. And I don't. This is where you could argue professionalism hasn't worked as effectively as it should have, if we're being honest. And we have to be brutally honest. We have to, take stock and account of the situation and go. Professionalism hasn't worked as well as it should. And go from there. Thoughts on there being three F1 races in America? Is it getting Americanized? Liberty Media is American. Liberty Media is American. I think. I mean, America's always had races race in F1. And they've raced in so many different locations in the US, street circuits and road circuits. They've raced at Indianapolis. They've raced at Watkins Glen, Road America. Obviously, the Circuit of America's in Texas. They've done street circuits in Detroit, Vegas previously as well. So they've been going to America since the war, to varying levels of affection from the US fans and fans in the rest of the world. So for them to go to America is not unusual. It's not absurd. Is it getting Americanized though? You could argue there's no top American drivers in F1 at the moment, and a fair chunk of the IndyCar drivers are European. So you could argue that. So, three races, I think, is that a bit of overkill? You have to understand Liberty Media is an American organisation with American money. Haas is an American-owned F1 team. And Haas, you know, in NASCAR and IndyCar and the GT racing series they have over there, big sports, big motor racing organisation. You have to understand that. Um, and so, uh, in that regard, there's American cars on the grid for ownership and investment. Some big American companies obviously sponsor teams and have sponsored teams in the past, which has to be, thought about as well. Big American corporations have been title sponsors of teams in the past, so that's something that needs to obviously be factored in. And I think the Vegas race makes logical sense in a sense because Vegas has a lot of big corporations have now moved their headquarters there. It's not just a gambling city anymore or a tourist trap. There are other things there, and they want to increase their sporting portfolio. They've obviously the Vegas Golden Knights, the Oakland Raiders relocating there. They've got the NASCAR track at Vegas. Does need redevelopment, mind and upgrading, but they've got the NASCAR facility, and obviously getting the F1 on a semi-permanent basis. Whether they build a permanent track at Vegas or not is irrelevant. They might decide to look at the Vegas NASCAR oval and maybe expand upon that, make a big multi-purpose facility over there, and use that as a basis. But they want to diversify their economy. There is the hotel space. There is obviously the transportation links on interstates and with the airport there as well. They've got the capacity to house uh, the teams and fans from all over the world. But it's a street circuit, and that's I think a bit frustrating. Is there are other facilities in the US that, given a bit of investment, such as Road America or Watkins Glen, could definitely be brought up to the current standards required by F1. It's a difficult one. I'm not a massive fan of street circuits myself. Um, I don't enjoy them, but I've seen street circuits and lots of different formula be really not interesting at all. Long Beach, Montreal to a certain extent is built on the old Olympic Park, so it's not a true street circuit. Although when it was first raced, it was. Um, Monaco, obviously for its history, yes, but it's had its day. Um, the only street circuit I'm a massive fan of is Surfers Paradise globally. The only one. I honestly think the Charlotte Roval would probably be in a better location for a third F1 race. If I'm being brutally honest, the infrastructure with the motorsport teams already there. They have the infrastructure in place. It's ready built. So it's up to FIA standard because they do a lot of testing at the Charlotte Roval, which is the infield inside the Charlotte Motor Speedway. Obviously, all the NASCAR and IndyCar teams, a lot of them are based around within 40 miles of that location. So they could quite easily host the F1 teams there and give some logistical support to them as well. I understand the choice of Vegas, but I'd much rather see Watkins Glen, the Charlotte Roval, or Road America. Charlotte Roval's already up to Indianapolis kind of standards. It's a super speedway and it's got a better circuit on the infield than Indy does, in my opinion. I think it really does. But we've been to Indianapolis before multiple times. I don't know, but that's where I'm coming from. Let's have a look at some of the other questions. Should the F1 still be at Silverstone? No, Silverstone's a terrible circuit. I've got my opinions on Silverstone. They were obviously planning to move it to Donington. That redevelopment hit the skids 12, 13 years ago, and that was mismanaged. But there are a few other circuits in the UK that can host modern F1. You would need to heavily invest in places like Snetterton. Snetterton's got a noise limit and a race limit per year, so you can't have it at Snetterton, even though that would be a brilliant circuit for F1. With the current configuration, you just got to do some adjustments to runoff areas and stuff, but there's a noise limit and there's a limited amount of races allowed at Snetterton per year because of where it is. Thruxton's too dangerous. Even if they made modifications, you'll die because it's the most dangerous circuit in the UK, if not in Europe, after Spa. And that is no joke with Thruxton. So you're limited to between Donington, Brands Hatch, if they could make some modifications to the circuit. It has hosted the Grand Prix in the past. Um, or Silverstone, you're limited. You are limited in the UK for racetracks. The problem with England is there are a lack of depth in the clubs. There are National League football clubs that are bigger clubs than rugby union championship clubs. Yes, that is a fact. Super League has more depth with clubs in like Featherstone and Lee and the second tip. Not now the money. There's bigger issues in rugby league. Um, even though I think Featherstone, they're very historical club, and so are Halifax as well. The stadium infrastructure is shocking, and Lee, they're terrible. What's the nearest track to you? Would be that's Thruxton is the nearest circuit to me. It's Thruxton, and it's my favourite circuit. When I watch the touring cars and superbikes, it really is as dangerous as they say. Highest average speed. There's a reason why F1 cars don't test there. They can do tests at Silverstone if they want, and track days at Silverstone. There's a reason why F1 does not do Thruxton. Just even if it's just a single team doing some testing, there's a reason why they don't go to Thruxton. It's not because the runoff areas aren't big enough or the gravel traps. It's too dangerous. It's not a flat circuit. It undulates, and it's the highest average speed. You're flat out for 60 to 70% of the lap. You're going full throttle, and with an F1 car with the higher speeds that it has, yeah. With the way the track layout is, yeah, you could make the modification to make it F1 standard. It would be bloody interesting to watch and really fun. But yeah, Ruxton's a killer. It's I would compare it to the Le Mans circuit and the Nürburgring for danger. It's less famous than those two circuits, but for danger, it's definitely fun watching the touring cars and the superbikes and the support packages they have when they go to Thruxton. And the truck racing is fun because it's such high average speeds. I think on a superbike, you're looking at a 130, 140 mile an hour average speed around the circuit. Touring car, you're looking at, again, high 110s, 120s. If you're battling mid-pack, if you're at the front and you're clear, you're again looking at about 125, 130 mile an hour average speed. So you're going through the box. You're going a fair click, and it's not for the faint-hearted. Is Thruxton. You just watch the British touring car package or the British superbike package. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's a very quick lap. But it is the drivers say it's the most. It's that and Snetterton for me are my two favourite circuits in the UK. Snetterton, you've got nice long straights where you can just open up the throttle and just nail it. Thruxton, it's just a flowing circuit. There's no real slow sections. When you're on, you're going. Whereas some of the other circuits, I'm not a fan of the Silverstone layout. I'm not a fan of Silverstone. I would have preferred to see Donington have the modifications required to reach F1 status, Grand Prix status. But we all know that the issues with the redevelopment and how it went horribly wrong, and the financial issues the track owners faced who bought it out from the old track owners, and the debts and the uncertain financial future of the facility. But yeah, no, Thruxton's my favourite. Snetterton's my second favourite for the British circuits we have. And yeah, I just love the high speeds they have, and just the Craner curves at Thruxton and the bomb hole at Snetterton are just watching bikes and cars go through there at third, fourth gear or Craner curves. You're flat out. You're hoping you don't die. But for me, that's yeah, motor racing at its peak. Wakefield, Castleford, and Featherstone will have funding to improve their state. They do, but look how they're doing. Look how Castleford and Wakefield are doing in the Super League this season to start off, and Featherstone aren't in the Super League. So, while they're great historical clubs and they've had some great players play for them, they're not the strongest out there. So it's well and good having funding to improve the stadium infrastructure. where do you take that next step? How do you, make that next step? I mean, our stadium is one thing, but if you're not winning matches and you're not successful, it becomes like the Darlington Stadium, like an absolute beached whale, where it's never at capacity, um, financially difficult to operate, and leads to financial problems. We were discussing the Darlington Stadium the other day, and it's got a capacity of 20,000, and the average attendance is two. So you've got the operating cost of an arena that nowhere near capacity, at 10% capacity, which is ridiculous. So it's all well and good saying, "Well, we're going to pump money into Wakefield Trinity Wildcats and Castleford Tigers and Featherstone Rovers and improve their infrastructure." Oh, that's great. But if then you can't fill said stadium with fans, it becomes a little bit of a white elephant. It becomes a little bit of, the red herring in the elephant in the room. Like, okay. And look what's happened to the Bradford Bulls with Odsal and their financial difficulties. It's, you know, you've got to build success. And even Spurs can't sell out the new White Hart Lane. They haven't even got naming rights for it. And how long has that been open for now? And that's been a financial burden on the club and has led them to financial problems. And yes, they've signed the NFL deal for 2 games per season, but that stadium has left the club with a massive amount of debt, which is going to impact that club going forward with UEFA's new spending rules that are coming in, massively. And they signed up for the European Super League out of desperation, not because they're one of the best 12, 15, 20 club in Europe for success. It's just they have no money. Arsenal, there's a reason why Arsenal's form has declined in recent years. It's not because they are a solidly supported club. It's they're being paid off the stadium. Um, Rugby league in England's big. It's not become unfashionable. It's got a solid fan base. It's just been badly run and badly governed for a very, very long time. The TV deals they signed with Sky were advantageous to Sky, not to the league. The changing it from a winter to a summer sport has done it no favours. Yes, it's married up with the NRL, so both leagues play their same seasons at the same time. But I would not want to play rugby league or rugby union in the height of summer when it can be 30, 35 degrees. Player welfare, come on. And they wonder why the quality gap between the Super League and the NRL is so massive. It's not even fair. The lack of investment in infrastructure over a very long period of time, the muddled and dysfunctional governance of the sport from the RFL, the Super League, and such, for a very long time. The lack of exposure the sport gets to a wider, not only national but international audience. This is where this World Cup is so important. And the RFL have been saying rugby league doesn't have fans in the south of England. Hi. Apparently, people like me don't exist according to the RFL. We don't exist. There are no fans in the south of England. I mean, then what's the point of having the London Broncos and the London Scholars if we've got no fans in the south of England? I mean, they should be, packing out stadiums. I mean, the London Broncos should be a Super League club. And for a while, they were a very decent side in the 90s and early 2000s. And again, mismanagement, and a lack of exposure and a lack of advertising, and a lack of, grassroots investment outside of the north of England is the problem is rugby league in this country is always plays safe. It doesn't want to do outreach programs to non-traditional locations to advertise their sport to kids, because I think it's an easier sport to play and understand for people than rugby union. It's far easier to understand and pick up the basics. It really is. It should be a really fashionable sport in regards to the ease of playing it in comparison to rugby union, which is more complex. There's far more rules. This is a more basic version of rugby. It's a faster paced version of rugby, which will entertain kids no end and young people. And the RFL, and to a certain extent the Super League, have decided really they've ignored 70% of the UK as a potential market for their product, and wealthy areas of the UK. Now, The experiment with the Toronto Wolfpack and to a certain extent the Ottawa race has been an expensive failure, uh, an embarrassing failure. And so, yeah, I don't think it makes it more boring. I've watched some really entertaining games in the NRL this season. If it's played correctly and at the right pace, with a fast play the ball, it can be very very entertaining. The problem is that the RFL and now the Super League since the mid '90s have been very unambitious for a very very long time, and basically very protectionist of the M62 corridor, which is not the wealthiest part of the UK by some margin. They they really haven't tried to grow the game in new locations. And the problem they've done is they've swapped it from a winter sport to a summer sport. And as a result, I think you get lower quality product because when you're playing a fast paced contact sport in the heat of summer, it does have an impact on player performance. Um, and the reason why the Premiership is more fun is across the board, even Worcester have good players. Any team can beat any team on a given day. And there's more international quality of players who represent their country on a given day. I would say, yeah, the Premiership is more fun than the Super League. You've got a more balanced league that's more competitive. Um, the skill level is higher because there's been investment in not only, there's been a lot of investment and the talent is nationwide. You've got a bigger player pool and talent pool to select from, ironically, because every region of the UK, apart from even the Northwest with Sale, every region of the UK, Southwest, Southeast, Midlands, Northwest, Northeast of England is represented in the Premiership we have right now. Whereas in Rugby League, you've got Lancashire, Yorkshire, a bit of Cheshire. There's your representation. That's your niche market. So already rugby union is winning the battle at grassroots and on the professional stakes because they've got a bigger outreach. They're not afraid of going into non-traditional locations and putting a team. And they've got more money behind them, better TV deal behind them, better sponsorship deals behind them, more exposure when it comes to the test side. The international with the Six Nations, every Six Nations match on live, free to air TV. And until recently, every autumn international on live, free to air TV as well, apart from the England games. So you've automatically got more exposure. The World Cup doesn't matter if it's a European-based World Cup or in the Southern Hemisphere. Every game on free to air TV. Rugby League, the last World Cup was only the England games on free to air TV. Even though we had Ireland, Wales, and Scotland also participating, their games were not shown live. We've got crappy highlights packages. So already, rugby union's got an advantage. They've really protected and evolved their products. And yeah, I don't know what else to really say. The RFL has mismanaged their product and the Super League as well so badly for so long. Now I think it's killing the sport. And don't get me wrong, if the Super League goes out of business and collapses, the sport will still be played. The sport definitely will still be played. But the problem is when you're comparing the English Premiership to the French top 14 and the United Rugby Championship, which is also in Europe with South African teams, all those leagues are all on a level par, I would say. The best teams will play each other and it'll be a very even contest. The Super League teams, right now, the West Tigers, who are the worst team in the NRL, would beat the majority of Super League teams. Whereas Leicester, for example, if they were to play any of the French top 14, it will be a contest. You don't know if Leicester are going to win every game against against all top 14 clubs. Rugby Championship on their day, every team can beat everyone. Um, so the European Rugby Union leagues are pretty equally competitive, is what I'm getting on a given day. Whereas the Super League, if you were to put them against the NRL, they're getting slaughtered. Oh, and the NRL has more teams in first grade than Super League. Super League has 12, and the NRL has 16. So, and they're already expanding the sport in Australia, and there doesn't seem to be any urge to expand the Super League. Partly because the Challenge Cup. So already, you've got to factor in the Challenge Cup, which is why you have a smaller top flight. Yeah, there could be that. We've had Tri Nations and Four Nations tournaments before. And it has been done before. But not having the Lions, the GB Lions tour for 12 years, I think, has also hampered, uh, the sport going forward and the development of rugby league in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, massively, and it hampered the growth of the sport in the rest of the UK. That was a mistake not having that for 12 years. And then our first tour back together, we get battered and we even lost a PNG, which shouldn't happen. We lost all 3 tests, and we lost a lot of the tour games as well. It was embarrassing. It was not good enough. And the fact that a fair few of the players selected in the Lions team were actually Australian, Blake Austin and Jackson Hastings, and Blake Austin's also played for Portugal as well, tells you all you need to know about the situation of the depth quality we have in the Super League. Yes, you could do that. Unfortunately, the NRL and State of Origin become a problem with having to try to fit that in. There's a reason why Super League is a summer sport now, Summer League now. It works with factoring in State of Origin and the Anzac tests and player availability. The NRL clubs will not be happy releasing their players. There's already a debate about State of Origin and player availability and how it affects the NRL competition. Some teams, during the State of Origin period, lose less players, and so their form benefits. Whereas those teams battling for the minor premiership or battling for finals footy lose their majority of their best players, and their form takes a hit as a result. But the NRL and New South Wales Rugby League and Queensland Rugby League, I don't think would be happy with having not only State of Origin to deal with, but then an international tournament of 4 nations to deal with. It wouldn't work. Which is the situation we find ourselves in. The RFL and the Super League went down this path in the mid-90s. Now, Australia and the NRL and the Australian Rugby League Commission and the rival Super League also had its own, schism in the 90s, which, nearly brought the sport to its knees globally. The mid-90s was the turning point for rugby league, for better for Australia and for worse for Great Britain. And there was a period where, if we had done things right, we could have been the dominant league. And I think how things could have been different. We missed an opportunity in the mid-90s massively because rugby league in Australia was at war with itself. And we chose the option, become a summer league. And the decline has been there ever since. I do sort of agree. When I was a kid growing up, it was religious viewing for me and my dad. When he would come and visit, when he was on leave from the army, and then after my parents separated, it was religious viewing, the Challenge Cup. The early rounds all the way through to the final, it was religious viewing. I think we have missed a trick. And the fact the Challenge Cup now gets less exposure as well, and they really have missed a trick. They really have. But organising internationals, you have to do it in the off season, and it's player availability. It really is, and part of the stumbling block is the NRL and Queensland and New South Wales rugby leagues because of State of Origin and that availability of putting, because they obviously you want to put your best team on the field in international competition to win. You want to put your best team on the field. And mid-season for the NRL, you just can't do it. And yeah, the Challenge Cup, we've seen some of the lowest attendances since the war. With the Catalan final, they've been in two finals, but that was the lowest attendance since the war. With when Catalan won a couple of years ago, the final after that had a higher attendance, but it was the lowest All England final since the war. So the second lowest attendance, the Challenge. The two lowest attendances we've had were just before COVID with the Challenge Cup. Now the RFL has signed an agreement with Wembley until 2027. So they signed a 20-year agreement as soon as Wembley reopened in 2007 to host the Challenge Cup at Wembley. Now, only two teams in the Super League right now play in France, and then you've got the London Broncos, who obviously play in London, currently outside the Super League, but in theory they could get back in a year or two. And the London Scholars. Core rugby, the majority of teams are from the north. There's 4 or 5 teams from either the south of England, Midlands and the south of England, and France. So the majority of teams that will, in theory, make the Challenge Cup final, because you can't count out Catalan and to a certain extent Toulouse in the future. And if the London Broncos were to become a Super League team again and have a really good first season back and establish themselves again, you can't discount them making another Challenge Cup final appearance. They've done it in the past. The majority of teams are from Cheshire, Lancashire, and Yorkshire. The M62 corridor. So having the final in London when the majority of fans and players are from the north, it just makes no sense. Now, of course, it's the traditional location for the final, absolutely. But is it the appropriate location for the final? And that's a question that's been asked for a while now. Even before COVID, we're going back to 2018, 2019, going, 2017, 2016. This is a question that's been asked for quite some time. Is having the Challenge Cup final at Wembley the right location to have said final? Should we take the final on the road around like St James's Park, Hull, the City Stadium in Hull, Ellen Road, or Headingley? Ellen Road, because it's a neutral ground. Old Trafford. They played obviously games at Anfield. Taking the games to the Midlands. There's some great stadiums in the Midlands that can host rugby league or rugby union for a one-off game. Taking it around the country. That would obviously, I honestly believe taking the Challenge Cup final on a rotation around the country, all regions, not just the north, would be better for the sport than keeping the final at Wembley long term. And this Rugby League World Cup, I think, is so important for the sport and growing it to a wider national audience. And England need to be successful at this World Cup. They need to make the final. They need to win, quite frankly. They're not going to, but they need to. To encourage, I mean, look how Rugby Union World Cup went in. Look how that World Cup went in 2015. Every corner of the country had games, and the stadiums were sold out. England were crap, but that's irrelevant. It was one of the best World Cups I've ever seen. That win for Japan over South Africa, the Amex in Brighton, was one of the highlights of the whole tournament. And packed out stadiums wherever games were played. It was a brilliant advert for the sport. Yes, the Super League final, grand final was played at Old Trafford. Again, taking the Super League grand final on the road might be a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea. But that's a Super League agreement with Manchester United. The RFL's agreements with the FA with Wembley. It's, again, two different governing bodies. The RFL does not have a say where the Super League grand final is played. That is up to Super League. The RFL has a say where the Challenge Cup final is played because they're the governing body in charge of that competition. It was a big event in the 90s and the early 2000s. I used to love watching the Challenge Cup, the early rounds through to the final. And you would think with the BBC Sport now being based in Salford, they would put more emphasis on a predominantly northern supported sport. Yeah. Just I honestly think that yes, Channel 4's got some limited rights, and that's really good to the Super League, but the TV rights agreement that's in place is just not good enough. And that's me being brutally honest about a sport that I love. And unfortunately, the NRL, I think the NRL is a better product. You could argue, yes, some of the rule changes divide opinion, and I think they might have put too many rule changes in such a short space of time. But I think they've now got the rules right on the field rules right. Uh, um, but yeah, I do think possibly taking the Super League grand final on the road as well would be an idea. They're already discussing the NRL grand final being taken on the road. They take State of Origin on the road for a neutral venue for one of the three games outside of Queensland and New South Wales. They go to Perth, they go to Adelaide, they go to Melbourne, and they sell out. You know, in Perth, Adelaide, and Melbourne every time. And there's talk, obviously COVID last year with relocating the grand final to Brisbane. There's talk of taking the NRL grand final on the road to a neutral location. Um, and and why not? It helps grow your product. And I think the RFL and Super League are killing their products, basically. They're killing the Challenge Cup, they're killing the Super League. Um, some of the commercial decisions taken baffle me. And the obsession with focusing on the development of the England side for the last decade and a half over the Lions, I think, has hampered growing the product. Um, and the lack of outreach to schools and grassroots communities outside of the north of England is killing the product because you're not growing the interest with the future playing base, which is the kids and teenagers of today. You're just not getting them interested because rugby union is played in more schools, more universities. There's more rugby union clubs at grassroots level than rugby league, amateur through to professional. Um, yet rugby league's been professional for longer. Make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. And that tells you all you need to know, really, about the state of the two codes. And yes, rugby union's got massive problems as well, but that tells you all you need to know. Rugby league has been professional for a lot longer, um, and the obsession of sticking to its traditional market and not looking at potential growth in the Midlands and the south of England. I don't know what to make of that really, because wealthier areas with more disposable income, some big sponsors are out there, big companies that would happily slap their logo and go, actually, we can get more exposure. Have us sponsor you. Is just makes no sense to me economically. If you are looking for growth and you're short of cash, untapped market, big population centres in the West Midlands and the South East, and you've got to start growing from somewhere, but it's just they're shooting themselves in the foot, and they have been for years. Years and years, rugby league has been shooting itself in the foot, and they've made some really shocking decisions in the boardroom. And then you look at the Toronto Wolfpack and the Ottawa Races, the Canadian experiment, the disaster that's been. And it's a shame because I do want to see a professional league. I would love to see a professional league in North America involving the Canadian and US sides. It would be fantastic. I think they've got more chance of getting a professional league set up in North America with Australian involvement, quite frankly. Um, the RFL have proved they can't do it. The RFL and Super League have proved they are incapable of not only governing the sport domestically, but growing the sport internationally. They have proved they're incapable. I say let the NRL do it. I already have no faith in the RFL and Super League to govern the game in this country correctly. Not that I have overreaching faith in the NRL and the Australian Rugby League Commission, but they seem to be better organised than we are. And that's saying something. Yeah, they could have definitely tried to grow the game with the Broncos and the Scholars in the south of England. They could have definitely assisted with Hemel Hempstead with the Stags. Uh, you know, Coventry with the Rams. I think it's the Coventry Dewsbury Rams, isn't it? No, it's Coventry. What's the Coventry side? Um, they could have definitely, given them investment. Looked at expanding the Super League by, inviting these clubs in. If that means making the Super League a closed shop, so be it. You know, there are options. I think at least protect the Super League from relegation promotion for a couple of years. Allow those new teams to stabilise, like Catalan and Toulouse and all that. And Catalan's been a success, but that was a merger of two French clubs that were basically going bust in France, um, down in Perpignan. Toulouse are one of the most, much depends on this World Cup now, and that interest from the US and Canada. Much depends on this World Cup being a success. No games have been played at Wembley. Oh, that's interesting. They are playing games at the Emirates though, and there is American money in Arsenal, so that could have some bearing. How they sell the TV rights to the US and Canada is crucially important. It really is crucially important, and getting interest from over the Atlantic. We know that the Wolfpack, the fans bought in. They really bought into to the Canadian Toronto market. Really bought in. So we know that there's fanatical fans in Canada. But it is important, I think, to yeah try and grow the game in North America. I think that's the future of rugby league. At least in the northern hemisphere, they need to grow the game in North America. Um, it's a perfect sport for North America with the speed of play and the physicality and the simplicity of the sport. Um, and I do think the failure of the Wolfpack and the failure of the Ottawa races and the failure to get a professional league off the ground because of COVID. Yeah, I know it's not a true Jamaican side, but it's an opportunity to grow the game in Jamaica at least, and they're a sports mad country. I mean, there's less money in Jamaica, but they're a sports mad country, and it's a chance to. They'll be broadcasting that on Jamaican TV. Absolutely, it's a chance for Jamaica at least and the Caribbean to go. We've got some athletes. Let's give it a shot. And there's a big Jamaican population and Caribbean population in Florida and parts of the east coast of the US. A lot of West Indians and Caribbeans go to university and college um, in the US and to a certain extent Canada as well. So there is a West Indian diaspora, is the term, in the US and Canada. And there is an opportunity, I honestly believe, in here with this World Cup to try and grow the sport, not only here but also in North America. Um, and no, they're not going to have a. They're not even close to having a rugby union team at the World Cup, although they do have a national side. They do. Um, it's a great opportunity, um, and they've been at the Football World Cup before, and this is their first opportunity to play at the Rugby League World Cup. And it doesn't matter how they do, in my opinion. It doesn't. It's just fantastic to have a new team there. And there is a big West Indian community in both the US and Canada, massive West Indian community. And it'll be interesting to see what the TV rights are um, for the US and Canada. And the time of year it's taking place, it's the early on in the NHL and the NFL seasons, when it's those early games where fans haven't really got overly invested because we're not in the playoffs. Um, So there is an opportunity, I think, to sell the sport to a US um, um, to the US and Canadian markets. Um, so let's have a look. Let's have a look at the TV, the broadcast rights. Let's see who actually in the US and Canada will be. So it's going to be taking place from the 15th of October to the 19th of November. So they've rescheduled it. Uh, and they've obviously expanded the tournament from the previous by two teams. Match officials, venues, group stage, broadcasting. Here we go. So it's been broadcast in New Zealand, uh, PNG, uh, BBC gets every single match live, and yeah, it's. So I don't know what. Uh, so at the moment, there's limited overseas TV rights, but it will be on Facebook Live. So there is an opportunity. It is on Facebook Live. Yes. Uh, um, but yeah, there's not broadcasting massively overseas, which I think is an absolute shambles, in my opinion. Um, Pre-tournament matches. England will be playing Fiji on the 7th of October at the Crown Royal Arena in Rochdale. Let's have a look at the venues. 21 venues for the three tournaments: the men's, the women's, and the wheelchair. 18 venues will be used for the men's tournament, and Preston will be announced as a training venue. Uh, Workington won't be hosting now, and so the Kingston Park, where the Newcastle Falcons play, will have three matches in Newcastle. So the venues: Manchester, Old Trafford; London, the Emirates; Sheffield, Bramall Lane; Coventry, well, the Rico basically; Wigan, the DW; Leeds, Headingley; Doncaster, the Keepmoat; Warrington, the Halliwell Jones; um, Lee Sports Village; Kingston Park in Newcastle; the York Community Stadium; St Helens, the Totally Wicked; Huddersfield, the old John Smiths; the Kirkleys; Bolton, the old Reebok; Hull, and Ellen Road; St James's Park, Riverside. So there's two venues in Newcastle, one in Middlesbrough, York, Hull, Doncaster, Sheffield, Manchester, Coventry, and London. So there's four in Greater Manchester, three in West Yorkshire. Base camps: Australia will be based in Manchester, Cook Islands in the Tees Valley, England will be based in Manchester, Fiji will be based in Hull, France will be based in Bolton, Greece will be based in Sheffield, Ireland will be based in Leeds, Italy will be based in St Helens, Jamaica will be based in Leeds, Lebanon in Lee, New Zealand will be based in York, PNG in Warrington, Samoa in Doncaster, Scotland in Newcastle, Tonga in St Helens, and Wales in Preston. Go. The fact there's only one stadium in the Midlands and one stadium in the south of England is not great, really. It's not really a truly national competition, then National World Cup. But Newcastle, I think, will get good attendances. But yeah, that's a shame, I think, in my opinion. But got both stadiums in Leeds are being used. Liverpool, Anfield was going to be used, but then of course the reworking meant it was no longer available. Um, so yeah, and of course Workington, the council deciding not to go on with the stadium redevelopment that was planned and pulling out has led to a change there with uh, the smaller stadium in Newcastle being used, the Kingston Park, but it's got a capacity of over 10,000. So let's look at the capacities quickly. Manchester Old Trafford's got a capacity of 74,994. The Emirates has got a capacity of 60,260. St James's Park has got a capacity of 52,405. Ellen Road's got a capacity of 37,890. Kingston Park's got a capacity of 10,200. The Leigh Sports Village has got a capacity of 12,000. Honeywell Jones has got a capacity of 15,200. The Keep Moat has got a capacity of 15,231. Headingley's got a capacity of 21,062. The DW has got a capacity of 25,138. The Coventry Building Society Arena, formerly known as the Rico, has got a capacity of 28,723. Bramall Lane's got a capacity of 30,702. The Riverside's got a capacity of 34,742. The MKM Stadium, the Hull City Stadium, 25,400. The University of Bolton Stadium, formerly the Reebok, and the Macron has got a capacity of 25,586. The Kirkley Stadium, formerly the John Smith Stadium in Huddersfield, has got a capacity of 24,500. St Helens has got a capacity of 18,000. And the York Community Stadium is the smallest with 8,500. So, yeah, it is a shame. The broadcasting rights, it's just interesting, really, with the broadcasting rights at the moment. And they're trying to find, obviously, broadcasters further afield as well. So there is that. But yeah, so that's as it looks now. Obviously, they've had to rejig some things. So Liverpool was due to hold a quarter-final match, and that was moved to Wigan. So yeah, that's as things stand. And of course, with what happened with Workington and the council changing, and the new council decided that they would be unable to host, and they decided not to continue with that refurbishment, which is a massive shame because it was used as a venue at the last World Cup held in England in 2013. So there is that. But some of the stadiums they've chosen are big stadiums. St James's Park, the Emirates, and Old Trafford and Ellen Road. They're and Bramall Lane. These are big football stadiums that should sell out. If they don't sell them out, I'll be worried. It'd be interesting to see how they play the games at the Emirates. What capacity, what numbers they get at the Emirates games. And I want to go to a game at the Emirates if I can. But we'll have to see what happens come October, really, and if I can get tickets. So there we go. It's not. I wouldn't mind watching a game at the Emirates. I can get there. It'll be a very long, tiring day, and getting home will be a bit knackering, but it is what it is. So there's that. Anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. I've got some housework to do. Of course, I'm going to watch the Grand National. Thank you very much for all your questions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.